Ukraine crisis, Joe Biden warns Russia faces isolation. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden has warned that Russia faces rising costs and greater isolation if it fails to respect peace deals in Ukraine. Mr. Biden, on a visit to Ukraine, said Russia continued to violate ceasefires. He was speaking after holding talks with President Petro Poroshenko. Some 4,300 people are thought to have died in eastern Ukraine's conflict since April. Russia is regularly accused of arming separatist rebels, but its officials deny the allegations. Mr. Biden is in Kyiv on the first anniversary of the start of mass protests that culminated in President Viktor Yanukovych relinquishing power. An appeal on social media is credited by many with starting the wave of protests 1 year ago which ended in the overthrow of President Viktor Yanukovych. Mustafa Imist, a Ukrainian investigative journalist of Afghan origin, asked people on Twitter and Facebook to spread his call to meet that night on Independence Square, the space at the heart of the Ukrainian capital affectionately known as the Maida Square in Ukrainian. "We are meeting at 22:30 by the Independence Monument," he wrote in Russian. "Dress up warm. Bring umbrellas, coffee, tea and friends." Turn out they did, and the Maida quickly became the focus of protests against Mr. Yanukovych's political turn towards Russia. A year later, the Yanukovych administration is gone and pro-Western revolutionaries have consolidated their hold on Kyiv through elections. Mr. Imist himself, to the consternation of many former allies, went into mainstream politics and is now an MP for the party of the new president, Petro Poroshenko. But in a recent interview, he said he wanted to pave the way for a new kind of transparent, honest politics. "I want to be honest and I want to be free," he said. After stressing the danger posed to Ukraine by Russian aggression, the U.S. Vice President said there was a different path for Russia and her proxies. He said Russia should respect the ceasefire, restore Ukrainian control over its own borders and remove illegal military formations, military equipment and militants. He said Russian President Vladimir Putin had agreed to carry out all of those actions, but none had occurred. In the run-up to Mr. Biden's visit, Russian officials warned the U.S. against selling arms to the government in Kyiv. American officials told the Reuters news agency that Mr. Biden would announce an increase in supplies including radars and vehicles, but would not supply arms. Figures released by the UN Human Rights Office on Thursday showed that an average of 13 people have been killed daily in eastern Ukraine since the September 5 ceasefire came into place. A report by the UN described a total breakdown of law and order in the rebel-held Donetsk and Luhansk regions. It also highlighted allegations of abuses by government forces. 4,317 deaths since April, 957 of them since the September 5 ceasefire, and 9,921 people wounded. 466,829 internally displaced persons within Ukraine. 454,339 refugees living abroad, 387,355 of them in Russia. It's a UN data from November 18. The anniversary of the start of protests that removed President Yanukovych is being celebrated in Kyiv. But President Putin told an audience in Moscow that popular uprisings in Ukraine, Georgia and Kyrgyzstan had yielded tragic consequences. Conflict broke out in eastern Ukraine when the government in Kyiv launched an operation to recapture areas seized by pro-Russian rebels, weeks after Russia had annexed Ukraine's Crimea region. By early August, Ukrainian forces looked to have captured much of the territory held by the rebels. But the rebels made a dramatic turnaround, apparently with direct help from Russia, pushing Ukrainian troops out of their territory. On September 5, the sides agreed a ceasefire and promised to pull military forces out of the area.